Chapter 1. The Camping Confession. Benjamin Clowers considered himself a man of reasonable expectations. That was probably why he was generally happy. At 27 years old, he had a decent apartment, a steady office job, friends he enjoyed spending time with, and enough free time to actually live his life outside work hours. There were people who treated every inconvenience like a personal betrayal from the universe. Ben had never understood them. Life was difficult enough on its own. Why volunteer for extra nonsense? The thought crossed his mind as he knelt beside an open duffel bag in his living room. Camping gear was spread across the floor in organized piles. Sleeping bag, tent, extra batteries, fishing tackle, a cooler waiting in the kitchen. The upcoming long weekend promised 3 days of peace in the woods with his father and several of his father's longtime friends. His phone buzzed. A message from his dad appeared. "Don't forget bug spray this time." Ben laughed. "One time. It happened one time." The response came immediately. "You looked like a disease documentary. Love you too, Dad." Ben tossed his phone onto the couch. He was folding a sweatshirt when someone knocked on his apartment door. The knock was rapid and familiar. Only one person knocked like she was attempting to arrest the building. Ben crossed the room and opened the door. His sister stood there holding a coffee cup. "Well," Emily said, walking inside without invitation. "Good to see you too. You entered before I said anything. You weren't stopping me. I was processing the attack." She snorted. Emily was 11 months younger than him and somehow managed to possess 3 times his energy. Where Ben was steady and deliberate, Emily approached life like she was late to everything. She stopped in the middle of the living room. "What happened in here?" "I'm packing." "For what?" "Camping." Emily looked around. "You own an alarming amount of outdoor equipment." "I've been camping my entire life. Normal people rent cabins. Those people are wrong." She pointed accusingly. "See? That's exactly the attitude that gets you eaten by bears. Bears don't eat people because of opinions." "I'm pretty sure they do." Ben shook his head. Some conversations only existed because Emily was involved. She wandered toward the kitchen while he resumed packing. "What are you doing this weekend?" she asked. "Camping." "With who?" "Dad. A few of his friends." Silence. Ben looked up. Emily was standing completely still. The expression on her face suggested he had just informed her he planned to spend the weekend on the moon. "Dad?" she repeated. "Yeah. Our dad." Ben blinked. "I only have the one." She stared at him. He stared back. A growing sense of confusion settled over the room. "You're serious?" Emily asked. "About having one father?" "Fairly certain." "Ben." "Emily. You still see Dad." The confusion suddenly disappeared. Now he understood. "Sure." Her eyes widened. "Since when?" Ben frowned. "Since always." "No." "Yes." "No. I mean after the divorce." "After the divorce too." Emily looked genuinely shocked. Not surprised. Shocked. As if a fundamental law of reality had abruptly stopped functioning. "You've been seeing him regularly?" "Yep. For years." "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" Ben slowly set down the sweatshirt. "Tell you what?" "That you still had a relationship with Dad." His eyebrows rose. "I wasn't aware it required an announcement." "You know what I mean." "I don't actually." Emily stared at him in disbelief. For the first time, Ben realized this wasn't merely surprising information to her. She felt blindsided. "We haven't talked to him in years," she said. "You haven't. You knew that." "Of course. And you never mentioned you still saw him." Ben considered the statement, then shrugged. "Nobody asked." The answer did not help. Her expression somehow became even more incredulous. "Nobody asked?" she repeated. "That's generally how conversations work." "You seriously never thought that was important?" "Not particularly." "Ben." He held up both hands. "What exactly were you expecting me to do?" "I don't know." "Mention it." "Why?" "Because he's our father." "Exactly." Emily opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing emerged. Ben continued packing. After several moments she spoke again. "You really spent time with him this whole time?" "Yeah." "How often?" "Every month or so." The silence that followed felt heavier. When she spoke again her voice was quieter. "I honestly thought you stopped seeing him too." Ben leaned back against the couch. "Why?" Emily looked away. "I don't know." "Did I ever say I stopped?" "No." "Did I ever imply it?" "No." "Then why would you assume I did?" She didn't have an answer. And that was the problem. Neither of them understood why the other seemed confused. Ben had never hidden his relationship with their father. Emily had simply never imagined it continued. 2 completely different realities had existed side by side for over a decade. And suddenly both realities had collided. Chapter 2. The Woman with Too Many Opinions. Ben had always liked camping because trees rarely demanded explanations. People, unfortunately, were another matter. By Saturday morning, he was sitting beneath a canopy of pine branches drinking coffee while trying to determine how a simple answer in his apartment had somehow evolved into a full-blown family crisis. The The campsite was already alive with activity. Someone was cooking bacon. Someone else was unsuccessfully trying to start a camp stove. His father's friend Rick had been telling the same fishing story for 20 years and showed no signs of stopping. Normal. Comfortably normal. Exactly what Ben had hoped for. His father settled into the folding chair beside him. You look thoughtful. That's dangerous. His father nodded seriously. It usually is. Ben smiled despite himself. The resemblance between them had become stronger with age. Same dark hair. Same broad shoulders. Same tendency toward dry humor. His father sipped his coffee. Everything okay? Ben considered pretending, then decided against it. Emily came by before I left. His father's expression changed almost immediately. Oh, yeah. What happened? I mentioned I was camping with you. His father stared into his mug. That must have been interesting. Interesting is one way to describe it. Ben wasn't sure what else to say. For years this arrangement had simply existed. Ben visited his father. Emily didn't. Nobody discussed it. Everyone carried on. Now that silence seemed considerably less stable. His father finally shrugged. She's entitled to make her own choices. That's what I've always thought. And you're entitled to make yours. Ben nodded. The subject ended there. One thing Ben appreciated about his father was that he never pushed. He asked questions when necessary and left the rest alone. The sound of a car entering the campground interrupted the morning. Several people glanced toward the gravel access road. A dark SUV bounced over a pothole before finally pulling into a parking area nearby. The driver's door opened. Then another. Then another. Then another. Ben blinked. It was apparently carrying several people. And there they are, Rick announced. Who? Ben asked. My daughter and her friends. Rick stood. Help me unload this circus. That should have been Ben's warning. Instead, he stood and followed. The SUV's cargo area opened. An avalanche nearly escaped. Ben jumped backward as a folding chair slid toward him. What exactly is all this? He asked. A woman's voice answered. Preparation. Ben turned. The woman standing opposite him was around his age, dressed for hiking, and balancing a cooler against one hip. She looked entirely too pleased with herself. Ben glanced at the overflowing vehicle. Preparation for what? Colonizing Mars. She raised an eyebrow. You have a problem with being organized? I have concerns. About? The possibility that you've packed enough equipment to survive societal collapse. The woman's smile widened. That's a completely different category of preparation. Ben immediately regretted engaging. Unfortunately, it was too late. Rick arrived beside them. Ben, this is my daughter Olivia. Olivia extended a hand. Nice to meet you, Ben. They shook hands. Then a folding table unexpectedly collapsed from the SUV. Ben instinctively grabbed one side. Olivia grabbed the other. Unfortunately, neither anticipated the coffee tumbler perched on top. The cup launched itself into the air. Coffee scattered everywhere. Several droplets landed directly on Ben's shirt. Silence followed. Olivia looked at the shirt, then at the coffee, then back at the shirt. I'm blaming gravity. Ben looked down. Interesting strategy. It has an excellent record. You knocked over the table. Gravity knocked over the table. You were touching it. So were you. Ben stared at her. She stared back. Rick burst out laughing. You're going to get along great. Neither of them looked convinced. Later that afternoon, the campsite organized a hike. Ben found himself walking near the middle of the group. Unfortunately, Olivia occupied approximately the same section. The trail wound through dense forest. Birds called overhead. Sunlight filtered through branches. Peaceful. Until Olivia spoke. You walk too fast. Ben glanced sideways. That's not a real criticism. Sure it is. It's literally a hiking trail. Some people enjoy the scenery. I can enjoy scenery and maintain momentum. See? What? You said momentum. That's a normal word. It's a hiking trail, not a military operation. Ben looked skyward. This is why people avoid conversations in nature. Pine trees don't challenge your assumptions. My assumptions don't want to be challenged while walking uphill. Olivia laughed. Actually laughed. Not an annoyed laugh. Not a sarcastic one. A genuine laugh. The sound surprised him. Against his better judgment, it was contagious. A smile escaped before he could stop it. There, Olivia said. What? You smiled. I do that occasionally. I wasn't sure. What did you think I did? I assumed you reviewed spreadsheets recreationally. Ben stared. Wow. She looked delighted. Was I wrong? Very. How wrong? I don't even own spreadsheets. That sounds like something a spreadsheet enthusiast would say. The conversation somehow continued for the rest of the hike. Mostly arguments. Mostly ridiculous. Yet strangely enjoyable. When they returned to camp, several people were already preparing dinner. Ben volunteered to help. Unfortunately, Olivia volunteered too. That was how he found himself standing beside her while roasting marshmallows over a fire. She examined his work. You're burning it. No. The marshmallow is black. It's caramelized. It looks like coal. It's efficient. Olivia shook her head. You don't actually know how to enjoy things, do you? Ben looked horrified. I enjoy things all the time. Name 3. Fishing. Acceptable. Hiking. Debatable. Quiet. She laughed again. There it is. What? The honesty. Ben frowned. What does that mean? Olivia turned her marshmallow. Most people would have made something up. Why? To sound interesting. I don't care about sounding interesting. I noticed. You say that like it's a flaw. Not a flaw, she considered. Just unusual. For a moment neither spoke. The fire crackled between them. Voices drifted from nearby campsites. The evening air carried the scent of wood smoke and pine. Ben found himself studying her. Not obviously. He wasn't an amateur. Still, there was something refreshing about Olivia. Most people softened opinions to avoid friction. She seemed entirely comfortable disagreeing with others. More importantly, she appeared capable of being disagreed with. That was significantly rarer. A shout interrupted his thoughts. Someone had started organizing a board game inside the large camping shelter. Within minutes several people gathered around a table. Ben ended up across from Olivia. A mistake. 20 minutes later they were debating game strategy. 30 minutes later they were both accused of overthinking. 40 minutes later they were blamed for slowing down the game. You're impossible, Olivia informed him. You started this. You made a terrible move. It was statistically correct. Statistically boring. Those aren't the same thing. They are in board games. The surrounding players watched like spectators at a tennis match. Rick leaned toward Ben's father. They're definitely going to date. Ben nearly choked. Olivia rolled her eyes. We've known each other for 6 hours. Rick shrugged. I stand by my prediction. Please don't, Ben said. It makes things weird. It was already weird, Olivia said. Fair point. Everyone laughed. The game continued. The evening stretched on. And despite himself, Ben realized something unusual. He was having fun. Not because everything was peaceful. Not because everyone agreed. Not because there was no conflict. Quite the opposite. For the first time in a long while, he was spending time with someone who challenged him on every minor topic without turning disagreement into drama. The distinction mattered more than most people realized. Across the table, Olivia caught him looking. What? Ben immediately looked away. Nothing. That sounded suspicious. It wasn't. It definitely was. Ben sighed. You have an opinion about everything. I know. That's not normal. I never claimed it was. To his annoyance, he found himself smiling again. And to his even greater annoyance, Olivia smiled back. Chapter 3, Accidental Friendship. By Monday afternoon, Ben had come to a simple conclusion. He was almost certainly never going to see Olivia Mercer again. The camping trip was over. Everyone had gone home. Life had returned to normal. Ben returned to work Tuesday morning wearing business casual clothing and discussing quarterly reports rather than hiking trails. By lunchtime he was sitting in a conference room explaining a process improvement to 3 coworkers who looked relieved somebody else had volunteered to lead the discussion. The week passed quietly, just the way Ben liked it. Emily texted occasionally. Mostly questions. Some about their father. Some about dates and timelines. Some that Ben couldn't answer. The intensity of her curiosity hadn't lessened. If anything, it seemed to be growing. Twice she asked if he'd spoken to their dad recently. Ben answered honestly both times. The conversations remained awkward. At least neither of them were shouting anymore. That felt like progress. Friday arrived. Ben finished work at 5 sharp and headed home. Around 6 o'clock his phone buzzed. A text from his father. Barbecue at Rick's tomorrow. Noon. You're coming. Ben stared at the message. That wasn't a question. Correct. You realize I'm an adult. See you at noon. Ben smiled. Some battles weren't worth fighting. The next day, Ben parked near Rick's house and walked toward the backyard. Voices drifted through an open gate. Laughter followed. The smell of grilled food practically ambushed him. The gathering already appeared well underway. A dozen people occupied lawn chairs and picnic tables scattered across the yard. Rick spotted him first. There he is. Ben nodded. Still loud, I see. It's a gift. More of a condition. Several people laughed. Ben spent the next 15 minutes greeting familiar faces and accepting a plate loaded with enough food to feed a small village. He had just settled into a chair when a familiar voice appeared behind him. That's an irresponsible amount of potato salad. Ben closed his eyes. No. When he turned around, Olivia stood there holding a drink. She looked entirely too pleased with herself. You. Me. What are you doing here? She blinked. My father's hosting. Ben sighed. Right. Strong start. I wasn't expecting to see you. Disappointed. No. That answer came suspiciously fast. Ben pointed his fork. You're doing that thing again. What thing? Trying to turn every sentence into an argument. Olivia sat in the empty chair beside him. I don't have to try. That's deeply concerning. I'm comfortable with who I am. Everybody says that. Everybody also says they're bad at math. Most people are. Olivia stared. Ben stared back. 3 seconds later they were both laughing. Rick walked by carrying a tray. There they are. There who are? Ben asked. The future problem. Ben groaned. Can we stop this? No. Why? Because it's entertaining. Olivia nodded thoughtfully. That's actually a pretty strong argument. You're encouraging him. I know. Why? She smiled. Because it's entertaining. The afternoon passed surprisingly quickly. Ben eventually found himself helping move folding tables onto a patio while Olivia carried chairs. The arrangement should have reduced opportunities for conversation. Instead, it somehow increased them. Office job? Olivia asked. Yep. You like it? Ben shrugged. Mostly. That's an exciting answer. It's a realistic answer. Olivia balanced 2 chairs against her shoulder. What do you actually do? Ben explained. To his surprise, she listened. Actually listened. Most people lost interest halfway through. Olivia asked questions instead. Not because she found spreadsheets fascinating. Because she seemed genuinely curious about how people spent their lives. When he finished, she nodded. You know what? What? You're not nearly as boring as you look. Ben nearly dropped his end of the table. Wow. You're welcome. That wasn't a compliment. It absolutely was. No, it wasn't. You're assuming intent. You literally called me boring. I said you look boring. How does that help? Olivia pointed at his outfit. Blue polo shirt. Ben looked down. It's a normal shirt. Exactly. What does that even mean? It means if somebody asked me to describe you, my first answer would not be adventure. I don't need to look adventurous. See? What? There it is again. Ben frowned. There what is? The confidence. He blinked. That wasn't the answer he'd expected. Olivia shrugged. You don't seem interested in impressing people. That sounds exhausting. It is. Something about the way she said it made him look closer. For just a second, there was something different beneath her usual humor. Then it disappeared. The smile returned. The moment vanished. Over the following weeks, Ben's certainty that he wouldn't see Olivia again became increasingly embarrassing. Because he kept seeing Olivia. A retirement party. Olivia was there. A birthday gathering. Olivia was there. A casual Sunday cookout. Olivia was somehow there before he arrived. Their families had been intertwined for years. Neither had simply noticed. Now they did. Every event followed a predictable pattern. One of them would make a comment. The other would disagree. An argument would begin. 10 minutes later both would be laughing. The weird part wasn't the disagreements. The weird part was how easy everything felt. There was no effort involved. No performance. No need to carefully phrase every thought. Neither of them seemed remotely concerned about occasional friction. One Saturday evening, a group gathered around a fire pit in a friend's backyard. Ben arrived carrying a cooler. You're late. He looked up. Of course. Olivia sat in a chair near the fire. Hello to you too. You said 6. It is 6. She checked her watch. It's 6:03. You need hobbies. I have hobbies. What are they? Correcting people. That's not a hobby. It takes up enough time. Ben sat down. The fire crackled between them. A few mutual friends exchanged amused looks. Ben noticed. Unfortunately so did Olivia. Oh no. What? They're doing it again. The friends immediately looked innocent, which made them look guilty. Ben sighed. One of them pointed at Olivia. One pointed at Ben. Then both made exaggerated heart symbols with their hands. Absolutely not, Ben said. Agreed, Olivia said. Their responses overlapped perfectly. Everyone laughed. Ben shook his head. It's not happening. His friend Tyler grinned. We didn't say anything. You didn't need to. We're just observing. Stop observing. Tyler looked at Olivia. What do you think? I think Ben takes himself too seriously. Wrong. Olivia gasped dramatically. Did you hear that arrogance? It wasn't arrogance. Then what was it? Accuracy. The group erupted again. Ben buried his face in one hand. This had become a recurring issue. The more time he spent around Olivia, the more everyone seemed convinced something was happening. It wasn't. Probably. Maybe. He wasn't actually sure anymore. That realization was deeply inconvenient. A week later, Ben was leaving a coffee shop when someone called his name. He turned. Olivia stood near the entrance holding 2 notebooks and looking mildly annoyed. Why do you keep appearing everywhere? Ben looked around. We're standing outside a public building. That's not an answer. I think we're friends. The words slipped out before he fully considered them. Olivia paused. To his surprise, she looked genuinely pleased. Yeah, she said. I think we are. The realization felt unexpectedly natural. Ben hadn't been looking for new friendships, certainly not ones built on constant disagreements. Yet here they were, standing in a parking lot discussing whether coffee sizes should be measured in ounces or common sense. Common sense isn't measurable, Ben argued. Neither is happiness. but we still know when it's missing. That sounds like a motivational poster. Thank you. It wasn't praise. I know. A comfortable silence followed. One neither felt obligated to fill. Olivia finally adjusted the notebooks beneath her arm. I should get going. What are those for? She looked down. My notes. For what? I'm a travel writer. Ben blinked. You never mentioned that. You never asked. The response felt suspiciously familiar. Olivia smiled when she saw recognition cross his face. Took that from your playbook. That was petty. It was. What kind of travel writer? I write articles about destinations, hiking trails, local history, weird attractions. People pay you for that? They do. That's impressive. She mock squinted. Was that a compliment? I think so. You might be getting better at those. Don't push your luck. She laughed, then started walking backward toward her car. See you around, Ben. Given recent evidence, he had little doubt of that. See you around, Olivia. As she drove away, Ben stood beside his own car for a moment, then shook his head. His life was strange. A month ago, he hadn't known Olivia Mercer existed. Now seeing her had become normal. The thought should have bothered him. Instead, he found himself smiling. Unfortunately, his good mood lasted exactly 3 hours, because later that evening Emily called. And for the first time in years, she wanted to talk seriously about their father. The questions she was asking sounded different now. Less angry, more uncertain. As though she had started pulling on a thread and discovered the story she remembered might not be as complete as she'd once believed. For the first time, Ben suspected the past wasn't finished with any of them. Chapter 4. Misunderstandings and meddling. Ben's life had acquired a new and deeply annoying pattern. Anywhere he went, people assumed he and Olivia were dating. At first, he dismissed it as harmless teasing. By the middle of October, it had become an organized campaign. The realization struck him when he arrived at a community fundraiser and discovered exactly one empty chair at an otherwise crowded table. The chair happened to be beside Olivia. Ben stopped walking. Olivia looked from the chair to him, then to the chair again. Don't do it, she said. I wasn't planning to. Good. They both stared at the setup. Someone nearby immediately looked away. Far too quickly. Ben pointed. Caught you. Rick's expression became innocent enough to be suspicious. I have no idea what you're talking about. There are 20 chairs in this room. Yes, only one is empty. Interesting. It's beside Olivia. What are the odds? Ben narrowed his eyes. You're not clever. Rick looked offended. My wife disagrees. She's known you for 30 years. She's biased. Olivia snorted into her drink. Eventually Ben sat down because standing there all evening would have been ridiculous. Unfortunately, Olivia sitting beside him meant conversation was unavoidable. Not that either of them seemed particularly interested in avoiding it. How was work? She asked. Productive. That sounds boring. It was. At least you're honest. How was yours? Olivia leaned back. I spent 3 hours writing about a roadside attraction shaped like a giant peach. Ben blinked. Please tell me that's a joke. It's not. Someone paid for that article? They will. Humanity concerns me. She grinned. You're jealous. I'm absolutely not jealous. You sit in meetings. You interview giant fruit. The fruit doesn't schedule follow-up meetings. Ben paused. That's actually a strong argument. Thank you. The evening continued similarly. Half conversation, half debate, entirely effortless. The problem was that everyone around them noticed. By dessert, 2 separate people had asked whether they were dating. By coffee, someone had asked how long they'd been dating. The distinction apparently no longer mattered. By the time Ben got home, he had developed several new theories regarding mass delusion. A week later, the situation escalated. Ben should have known trouble awaited him when his father invited him to dinner and sounded unusually cheerful. Cheerful parents were dangerous. They knew things, or thought they did. When Ben arrived, he immediately noticed an unfamiliar vehicle in the driveway. His father opened the front door. Perfect timing. I don't like that sentence. Come in. Ben stepped inside, then stopped. Olivia sat in the living room. She looked equally surprised. What are you doing here? What are you doing here? Both turned toward their fathers simultaneously. Rick and Ben's father shared identical expressions. The expressions of men extremely pleased with themselves. Oh no, Ben said. Oh, absolutely no, Olivia agreed. Rick folded his arms. What? You invited us without mentioning the other person. So? Ben looked incredulous. You know exactly so. His father attempted innocence. Failed. It seemed efficient. Efficient for what? Nobody answered. That was answer enough. Olivia groaned. We're being manipulated. We're definitely being manipulated. The 2 fathers exchanged a glance. Neither looked remotely ashamed. Dinner itself wasn't terrible. Mostly because Ben and Olivia united against their common enemy. Specifically, their parents. At one point Rick casually mentioned a couple's hiking event happening the following month. Both Ben and Olivia immediately rejected the idea before he'd even finished speaking. The synchronized response caused the entire table to laugh, which somehow made everything worse. By the end of the evening, Ben and Olivia were texting each other solely to complain about everyone else. That realization arrived later that night. Ben looked at his phone, looked again, then sighed. He was now exchanging messages with Olivia voluntarily. Frequently, his younger self would have found this development highly suspicious. Several days later, Ben received a text. Need second opinion. He frowned. About what? Coffee. That's not a real problem. Meet me anyway. Against his better judgment, he agreed. An hour later they sat outside a small cafe near downtown. Olivia pushed a cup toward him. Taste this. Ben took a sip, then immediately made a face. That's terrible. Thank you. Several nearby customers turned to look. Olivia ignored them. The internet said this place was amazing. The internet lies. I knew it. Ben handed back the drink. Why was my opinion necessary? Because you tell the truth. The answer caught him off guard. She said it casually, like it was obvious, like everyone knew it. Ben looked at her. Olivia shrugged. What? Nothing. You got quiet. I'm thinking. Dangerous. I've heard that before. Probably because it's true. He laughed. The conversation drifted naturally afterward. Travel stories, family, random observations, the sort of discussion that happened when two people genuinely enjoyed talking. At some point, however, Olivia's expression shifted. Only slightly. Ben noticed anyway. What? She studied him. Can I ask something? Depends. That's not encouraging. It depends on the question. Olivia nodded. Fair. Then she leaned back in her chair. What's really going on with your family? Ben immediately knew what she meant. Emily, his father. The decades-old divide everyone pretended wasn't there. He considered giving a simple answer, then dismissed the idea. Olivia was smart enough to recognize avoidance. Complicated, he said. That's a politician answer. I work in operations, not politics. Still not answering. Ben sighed. The breeze stirred fallen leaves along the sidewalk. For a moment, he watched them instead of meeting her eyes. Then he spoke. My parents divorced when I was 11. Olivia nodded silently. My sister eventually stopped talking to my dad. You didn't. No. Why? Ben thought about the question. Not because the answer was difficult. Because nobody had ever asked it before. He's my father. Olivia waited. That's it. Mostly. He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know. Nothing dramatic happened between us. He was still there. Still showed up. Still acted like my dad. So you stayed in contact? Yeah. And your sister didn't. He nodded. Olivia was quiet for several moments. Not interrupting. Not steering the conversation. Just listening. The simple courtesy made continuing easier than expected. Emily found out a few months ago that I'd never stopped seeing him. A few months ago? Long weekend. Olivia stared. She only found out recently? Apparently. How? She asked what I was doing. Olivia began laughing. Ben frowned. Why is that funny? It's not. She continued laughing. It's a little funny. I fail to see how. You accidentally detonated a family secret by answering a basic question. When she phrased it that way, it did sound absurd. Despite himself, Ben smiled. A bit ridiculous. A lot ridiculous. The laughter faded. The seriousness returned. Olivia folded her hands around her coffee cup. You sound tired. Ben blinked. What? You sound tired. The statement landed harder than he expected. Not because she was wrong. Because she was right. For months he'd dealt with questions, explanations, old memories, family history. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted clarity. Very few people asked how he felt about any of it. Ben looked away. The street suddenly seemed interesting. What makes you say that? Olivia's voice softened. You talk about everyone else's decisions. He frowned. What does that mean? You talk about your mom. A finger lifted. Your dad. Another. Your sister. The third. Then her hand lowered. But you never talk about yourself. The observation sat heavily between them. Ben had no immediate reply, because he wasn't sure she was wrong. For years he'd occupied the middle ground, never choosing sides, never demanding explanations, never forcing anyone together, just existing in the space between people who preferred distance. At some point he'd simply accepted that role. Olivia studied him, not judgmentally, not sympathetically, just attentively. After a long moment she spoke. You know you're allowed to be frustrated, right? Ben laughed quietly. I know. Do you? He considered that, then smiled. Maybe not. Olivia nodded, as if she'd expected the answer. The conversation moved on after that. Neither forced it. Neither lingered unnecessarily. Yet as Ben drove home later that evening, he found himself thinking about those few words. You sound tired. It was such a simple observation. No advice. No criticism. No attempt to fix anything. Just an acknowledgement. Oddly enough, it felt better than either sympathy or solutions. For the first time in a long while, someone had looked at the situation and seen him rather than the problem. And that thought stayed with him long after he got home. Chapter 5, Things Get Complicated. By early November, Ben had stopped pretending that spending time with Olivia happened accidentally. There had been a period when he could convince himself their encounters were coincidence. Shared social circles, mutual family friends, overlapping schedules, all technically true. Unfortunately, reality had become significantly less cooperative. Reality looked a lot like Olivia texting him on Wednesday afternoon. Hiking Saturday. You're coming. Ben stared at the message. That's not a question. You complain when people don't invite you. I have literally never done that. Saturday. 9. Bossy. Efficient. Despite himself, Ben smiled. By now he knew arguing was pointless. Not because he couldn't win, because he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to. Saturday morning arrived cool and clear. Ben parked beside a trailhead outside town and stepped out of his truck. Olivia was already there. Of course she was. She leaned against her SUV wearing hiking boots and drinking coffee. You're late. Ben checked his watch. It's 8:53. You cut it close. I arrived 7 minutes early. Olivia shrugged. Still felt dramatic. Ben took a slow breath. One day somebody is going to challenge you to a debate. They have. And I won. You definitely didn't. We'll never know. The familiar rhythm settled over them almost immediately. The easy back and forth that required no effort. They started down the trail. The forest around them glowed with autumn colors. Leaves covered sections of the path. The air smelled clean and cold. For a while they walked comfortably, talking when something occurred to them, remaining silent when it didn't. The change from a few months earlier felt subtle but undeniable. Conversations no longer revolved around harmless arguments alone. They knew each other now, actually knew each other. Olivia knew his coffee order. Ben knew which movies made her cry. She knew he preferred listening over talking in large groups. He knew she collected old travel journals from thrift stores. Little details, the sort that accumulated naturally over time. At one overlook they stopped beside a wooden railing. The valley stretched out below, miles of forest disappearing into the distance. Olivia leaned on the railing. Okay. Ben glanced sideways. Okay, what? That's impressive. Nature usually is. You never sound amazed by anything. I sound amazed by things all the time. No. Yes. No. Ben pointed toward the valley. This is very nice. Olivia stared at him, then burst out laughing. Very nice. What? That's your reaction? He looked around. Would you prefer interpretive dance? Maybe. I don't have the flexibility. That sounds like a personal failure. Ben shook his head. I genuinely don't understand how your mind works. I understand how yours works. Oh. Olivia pointed at him. You're practical. True. Reliable. Hopefully. You don't get excited about possibilities. Ben frowned. That's not true. It absolutely is. I get excited. When? He opened his mouth. Paused. Closed it again. Olivia smiled triumphantly. See. You're unbearable. I know. The worst part was that she sounded proud of it. After the hike they grabbed lunch. Lunch became coffee. Coffee somehow became an entire afternoon wandering through a small downtown shopping district. Around 5 o'clock, Ben finally noticed something. He wasn't looking for excuses to leave. Normally, even when he enjoyed someone's company, there was eventually a point where he needed space. Time alone. Time to recharge. With Olivia, the hours slipped by unnoticed. That realization was uncomfortable, mainly because it suggested something. Something Ben wasn't quite ready to examine. As if sensing the direction of his thoughts, Olivia tilted her head. What are you thinking about? Dangerous question. Why? Because then I'd have to answer honestly. You usually do. That's fair. Olivia waited. Ben looked away briefly, then back at her. I had fun today. For once, she didn't make a joke, didn't tease, didn't challenge the statement. Instead, her smile softened. Me too. The moment lingered, long enough for both of them to notice it, long enough for neither to immediately know what to do with it. Then Olivia cleared her throat. Good, good. They both looked mildly horrified by how awkward they suddenly sounded. A second later, they started laughing. The tension dissolved, but not entirely. Some of it remained. Something new, something neither quite named. Over the next several weeks, spending time together became routine. They found reasons, then stopped pretending reasons were necessary. Dinner after work, a weekend market, movie nights with friends, long phone calls that began with practical topics and somehow lasted over an hour. At some point Ben noticed she had become the first person he wanted to tell things to. The observation should probably have alarmed him. Instead it felt natural. That fact alarmed him even more. Meanwhile, Emily continued digging into family history. At first her questions had been occasional. Now they were relentless. One Thursday evening she called. Ben answered while cleaning his kitchen. Hey, how often? Ben frowned. Hello to you too. How often have you been seeing Dad? The question again. Lately it seemed everyone wanted information from him. Around once a month. Since we were teenagers? Roughly. Silence. Then, you never missed years? No. You never stopped visiting? No. Another silence. Longer this time. Ben set down the dish towel. Something felt different. Emily. What? You okay? A bitter laugh escaped her. No. Well, that answered that. Ben leaned against the counter. What's going on? She exhaled hard. I talked to Mom. Okay. Then Aunt Rachel. Ben remained silent. He already suspected where this was heading. Emily continued. The stories don't match. There it was. Over the past months she'd discovered an unpleasant truth. Memory was messy. People were biased. Events looked different depending on who experienced them. Nobody enjoyed learning that, especially when childhood was involved. What exactly were you hoping to find? Ben asked. The truth. And Emily laughed again. This time it sounded frustrated. Apparently nobody agrees on what that is. Ben understood the feeling. More than she realized. Welcome to family history. I don't like it. Nobody does. Another pause followed. Then Emily asked the question. The one he'd been expecting eventually. Why didn't you tell me? Ben closed his eyes. Not this again. Tell you what? You know what? No, I actually don't. That you saw Dad every month. The old frustration returned. Not anger. Exhaustion. Months of repeating the same answer. Emily, nobody was stopping you from asking. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Her voice grew sharper. The point is you've basically had a completely separate relationship with him for years. Ben's patience began slipping. Because he's my father. He's my father too. Then why didn't you call him? Silence. Immediate. Heavy. Ben regretted the words the second they left his mouth. Not because they were cruel. Because they were direct. Emily inhaled. Slowly. Carefully. Then exploded. You think this is my fault? No. That's exactly what you're saying. It isn't. Then what are you saying? Ben rubbed his forehead. The conversation was spiraling. Again. I'm saying your choices aren't my responsibility. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Then Emily spoke very quietly. Do you know what hurts the most? Ben didn't answer. You were seeing him all this time. Her voice cracked slightly. You never once told me. Before he could respond, she hung up. For several minutes Ben stood alone in his kitchen. The apartment felt quieter afterward. Too quiet. He set his phone down. Picked it back up. Set it down again. There wasn't anything useful to say. Not immediately. Not while emotions were running high. The frustration remained anyway. Not toward Emily. Not entirely. Toward the situation. Toward years of assumptions and misunderstandings colliding all at once. Toward being treated like the keeper of secrets he never intended to keep. His phone buzzed. A new text. Olivia, how many people have you accidentally offended today? Ben stared at the message. Then laughed. Actually laughed. The timing was absurd. He typed back. At least one family member. The response came almost instantly. Want to talk? Ben looked at the screen. Simple words. Nothing dramatic. No obligation. No pressure. Just an offer. And without really thinking about it, he pressed call. Olivia answered on the second ring. Well, she said. That sounds worse than one family member. Ben leaned against his counter. Some of the tension eased immediately just from hearing her voice. Probably. What happened? For the next 20 minutes he explained. Not every detail. Just enough. Olivia listened. The way she always did. Without interrupting unnecessarily. Without trying to solve everything. Without turning the conversation into a competition over who was right. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that sounds hard. Such a simple response. Yet it landed with surprising force. Ben let out a slow breath. Yeah. It sounds like everybody's carrying around different versions of the same story. Pretty much. And somehow you're standing in the middle. That was exactly it. The part nobody seemed to notice. Ben smiled faintly. You know, you're annoyingly insightful sometimes. I prefer brilliant. There she is. Thank goodness. The emotional maturity was getting uncomfortable. He laughed again. A longer one this time. The kind that loosened something inside his chest. And in that moment, standing alone in his apartment while talking to Olivia, an uncomfortable truth finally became impossible to ignore. When things went wrong, she was the person he wanted to call. Not by obligation. Not by habit. By choice. The realization settled over him slowly. Warmly. Dangerously. Because Ben knew exactly what it meant. The only problem was that he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. Chapter 6. The first real fight. Ben spent exactly 2 weeks attempting to convince himself he wasn't falling for Olivia. It was not a successful effort. The evidence continued piling up. He looked forward to her messages. He noticed when a day passed without talking to her. He found himself collecting observations specifically because he knew she'd find them amusing later. Worst of all, his friends had noticed before he had. That realization alone was humiliating. The final surrender happened on a rainy Friday evening. Ben and Olivia were sharing dinner at a small restaurant downtown. Nothing fancy, just somewhere they both liked. About halfway through the meal, Olivia stopped mid-sentence and narrowed her eyes. What? Ben swallowed his bite of food. What? That smile. What smile? The one you're pretending isn't there. Ben immediately became suspicious. I don't trust where this conversation is going. You should. I definitely shouldn't. Olivia sat back, then smiled. Not her usual teasing smile. A smaller one, a softer one. And suddenly Ben understood something. She knew. Not everything, but enough. The realization surprisingly reduced his anxiety instead of increasing it. He set down his glass. Can I ask you something? Olivia blinked. The seriousness in his voice caught her off guard. Sure. Ben took a breath, then decided honesty was easier than overthinking. It usually was. Are we dating? The silence lasted all of 2 seconds. Then Olivia started laughing. Not because the question was ridiculous, because apparently it was. Oh, thank God, she said. Ben frowned. That's not comforting. I was starting to think we'd need a committee. A committee? For clarification. That seems excessive. We've basically been dating for months. Ben considered that. Unfortunately, she had a point. Okay. Her smile widened. That wasn't very romantic. It's honest. I suppose that'll have to do. Ben reached across the table. Olivia met him halfway. The gesture felt simple, natural. The absence of drama suited both of them. Neither needed grand declarations, just certainty. And somehow certainty felt more significant. Dating Olivia changed surprisingly little, which was how Ben knew it mattered. Nothing felt forced. They continued spending time together, continued arguing, continued making each other laugh. If anything, everything became easier. At Christmas parties, people finally stopped asking whether they were together. Mainly because they were. Rick declared himself victorious. Nobody let him forget how insufferable he'd been about it. For several weeks life remained pleasantly uncomplicated. Then reality intervened, as it usually did. The problem began one evening in January. Ben was helping Olivia pack for a short travel assignment. She'd been commissioned to write a series of articles about small mountain towns several hours away. The trip would take only 4 days. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't have mattered. Instead, something odd happened. Olivia found a photograph. The picture had slipped from a notebook while she packed. She bent down to pick it up, then paused. Who's this? Ben glanced over. The photograph showed him, his father, and Emily when they were children. A fishing trip. Years ago. Everyone smiling. His chest tightened unexpectedly. Olivia noticed immediately. The reaction was impossible to miss. Ben. I'm fine. The answer came too quickly, too automatically. Olivia's eyes narrowed. There it was. The look she got whenever she sensed something wasn't right. You're not. I'm okay. You're absolutely not. Ben looked away. Instantly. The movement itself was probably answer enough. Olivia set the photograph down. The teasing expression disappeared. What happened? Nothing. Ben. It's just an old picture. That's not why you reacted. The conversation drifted into uncomfortable territory. Territory Ben preferred avoiding. His personal strategy for emotional difficulty had always been simple. Handle it privately. Process it quietly. Move forward. Discussing every feeling rarely improved anything. At least in his experience. Unfortunately, Olivia viewed the world differently. Talk to me. There's nothing to talk about. You know that's not true. Ben sighed. I don't feel like unpacking my childhood tonight. The words came out sharper than intended. Olivia leaned back slightly. Not offended. Concerned. Which somehow made it worse. You don't have to unpack everything. Then what? I don't know. She gestured vaguely. Something. Ben rubbed his forehead. The frustration rising inside him had little to do with Olivia and everything to do with the conversation itself. I don't understand why everyone thinks talking automatically fixes things. I never said it fixes things. It doesn't. No. Her agreement surprised him. She continued calmly. But carrying everything alone doesn't fix things either. Ben didn't answer, because he had no interest in examining that statement too closely. Olivia watched him, waiting, giving him space. Normally he appreciated that quality. Tonight it felt suffocating. Can we not do this? Do what? This. Her frustration finally surfaced. Every time something genuinely hurts, you disappear. That's not true. It is. No, it isn't. Olivia folded her arms. Ben, you talk about difficult things like you're reading a report. The statement hit a nerve. I'm not emotional enough for you? That's not what I said. It sounds like what you said. Because you're twisting it. Ben stood. Immediately regretted it. Standing made the situation feel bigger. More confrontational. Neither of them liked confrontation. Yet somehow they'd wandered straight into one. Olivia remained seated. Her voice stayed calm. That somehow annoyed him more. You're allowed to not be okay. I know. Then why won't you admit it? Because I'm handling it. Are you? The question landed harder than any accusation. Silence followed. Heavy and uncomfortable. Eventually Olivia stood too. Neither said anything for several seconds. Then she picked up another notebook. Continued packing. The conversation ended without truly ending, which somehow felt worse. The next morning Olivia left for her assignment. The goodbye was polite, friendly, but something remained unresolved. Ben hated unresolved things. By the second day he hated them even more. Work provided temporary distractions. Meetings, deadlines, reports. None lasted. The argument kept returning. Not because he'd enjoyed it. Because Olivia wasn't entirely wrong. That was the annoying part. The truly infuriating part. She'd identified something he'd successfully ignored for years. Ben preferred functioning over feeling. When something hurt, he endured it. Adapted. Moved forward. The method worked. Mostly. At least until someone started asking questions. Questions he didn't particularly want asked. 3 days later Emily called. Her voice sounded nervous, which instantly made Ben attentive. Everything okay? I don't know. An encouraging start. What happened? Emily hesitated, then spoke quickly. I'm meeting Dad tomorrow. Ben froze. For a moment he thought he'd misheard. What? I'm meeting Dad. The words felt surreal. After all these years. After all this distance. After all this silence. Are you serious? Yeah. Ben sat down slowly. What changed? Emily laughed nervously. Everything. Fair answer. Neither spoke for a moment. Finally Ben asked, how do you feel? Terrified. Reasonable. What if it's awful? Then it's awful. What if it's awkward? It will definitely be awkward. Emily groaned. Helpful. I'm trying. No, you're being realistic. Ben smiled faintly. That sounded familiar. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. By the end Emily seemed calmer. Still nervous. Still uncertain. But committed. After hanging up, Ben sat quietly in his apartment. Thinking. His sister was preparing to have a difficult conversation she'd avoided for years. Not because she expected it to be easy. Because some conversations mattered more than comfort. The realization was unpleasant. Mainly because it applied elsewhere too. Olivia returned the following evening. Ben met her at her apartment. For several seconds after she opened the door, neither spoke. Then Olivia sighed. Hi. Hi. More silence. Then, I missed you. The words escaped before Ben could overthink them. Olivia's expression softened immediately. Good. I was kind of an idiot. Little bit. Fair. She stepped aside, inviting him inside. Ben entered. The familiar apartment felt strangely important, as if standing there represented a choice, a step, something. Olivia set down her bag. Emily called? Ben blinked. How did you know? You have the face. The face. The family face. That's not helpful. It makes sense to me. Ben laughed despite himself. Then he became serious. She's meeting my dad tomorrow. Olivia's eyes widened. Wow. Yeah. For a moment neither spoke. Then Olivia looked at him carefully. Waiting. Not pushing. Just waiting. This time Ben recognized the difference. The choice remained his. Always had. Slowly he sat down. And for the first time in a very long time he stopped trying to pretend everything was fine. Not because he'd suddenly become a different person. Not because Olivia demanded it. Because maybe trusting someone meant letting them see the parts of you that weren't fully put together. The conversation that followed wasn't dramatic. There were no grand revelations. No miraculous healing. Just honesty. Messy and imperfect. Yet when Ben finally left several hours later, something felt lighter. Not solved. Just shared. And for the first time, he began to understand there was a difference. Chapter 7. Uncomfortable Truths. The day Emily met their father felt strangely important. Not because Ben expected miracles. Quite the opposite. Years had taught him that family problems rarely resolve themselves in a single conversation. People weren't puzzles. You couldn't simply locate the missing piece and suddenly reveal the complete picture. Still, the meeting mattered. It was movement. After years of standing still, movement counted. Ben spent most of the day at work distracting himself. Unfortunately, distraction only worked until about 3 o'clock. After that, he found himself checking his phone every 10 minutes. At 4:30, his manager poked his head into Ben's office. You waiting for a hostage negotiation update? Ben looked up. What? You've checked your phone 15 times. I have not. His manager raised an eyebrow. 12. Maybe. Everything okay? Ben considered. Family stuff. The older man nodded immediately. No further explanation required. One thing Ben appreciated about his job was that people generally respected boundaries. Questions ended where they should. No digging. No drama. Just understanding. At 5 o'clock, Ben left. At 5:15, his phone finally rang. Emily. He answered immediately. Hey. Silence. Then, well, Ben leaned against his truck. That's encouraging. She laughed. The sound surprised him. Not because she laughed, because it sounded genuine, lighter than it had in months. We talked for 3 hours. That definitely exceeded expectations. How was it? Emily was quiet for a moment, gathering thoughts. Then she sighed. Complicated. Ben smiled. Sounds about right. Nobody told me adulthood was mostly discovering complicated answers. They absolutely told us. Maybe I wasn't listening. A reasonable possibility. Ben waited. Eventually she continued. I don't know what to do with everything. Meaning, another pause. Some things I remembered correctly. Okay. Some things I didn't. Ben expected as much. Family history rarely emerged untouched by memory. Years changed things. People changed things. Pain changed things. What did Dad say? He asked. Emily laughed softly. A lot. Helpful. No, actually. She took a breath. For the first time, I realized he remembers everything too. The statement caught Ben's attention. What do you mean? I don't know. Her voice grew thoughtful. I think I spent years treating him like a character in a story. Ben remained silent. Emily continued. And then I sat across from him and remembered he's a person. The words hung between them. Simple, yet profound. Because that was the dangerous thing about distance. The farther someone drifted from your life, the easier it became to reduce them into a symbol. A villain, a victim, a memory, anything except a human being. Emily sounded tired when she spoke again. There were things Mom was right about. Ben nodded despite her inability to see it. Makes sense. There were things Dad was right about too. Makes sense. I hate that answer. It's still true. She groaned. Everybody wants a good guy and a bad guy. Life rarely cooperates. No kidding. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. By the time it ended, Ben realized something had changed. Not completely, not dramatically, but undeniably. Emily wasn't angry anymore. Confused, sad, hopeful. All three at once, perhaps, but not angry. For the first time in a long while, that felt like progress. The next weekend brought an unexpected family gathering. Unexpected in the sense that nobody announced it until 2 days beforehand, which usually meant someone had decided family members needed exposure to one another. Ben arrived at his mother's house carrying a container of pasta salad. His mother answered the door. You made too much. This is literally the smallest container I own. That's concerning. I've heard that before. His mother hugged him, then let him inside. Several relatives already occupied the living room. Voices filled the house. Food covered most available surfaces. Normal family chaos. Ben was halfway toward the kitchen when Emily appeared. For a second, the siblings simply looked at each other. Then Emily smiled. A real smile. Not forced. Not strained. Just genuine. Hey, you brought enough pasta salad to survive winter. Preparedness is important. You're getting old. Ben pointed a warning finger. I'm 11 months older than you. Practically ancient. Some things never changed. Fortunately, Emily accepted the container and started toward the kitchen. Then paused. Thanks. Ben frowned. For what? She looked at him for a moment. Longer than necessary. Then shrugged. For not making me choose. The words landed unexpectedly. Ben didn't answer immediately, because he wasn't sure there was anything to say. Eventually he settled on the truth. I never thought you should have to. Emily nodded, then disappeared into the kitchen. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet somehow it felt important, as though years of misunderstanding had finally begun loosening their grip. Not disappearing, just loosening. Later that evening, after the gathering ended, Ben drove to Olivia's apartment. She opened the door carrying a mug of tea. Good family day or bad family day? Surprisingly good. Oh no. Ben laughed. What? You sound suspicious. I am suspicious. She stepped aside. Positive family progress usually means somebody has secretly joined a cult. Not everything is a conspiracy. That's exactly what conspirators say. Ben entered. The familiar comfort of being there struck him immediately. At some point, Olivia's apartment had stopped feeling like someone else's space. Not in an inappropriate way, just familiar, welcoming, a place where he could settle without effort. Olivia curled up on one end of the couch. Ben took the other. For several minutes they simply talked. Family, work, plans, the ordinary details of life. Then eventually the conversation circled back. It usually did. So how are you? Olivia asked. Ben narrowed his eyes. You ask that suspiciously. Because most people answer automatically. And I know when you're doing it. Unfortunate. She did. Ben leaned back, thinking. Actually thinking rather than searching for a convenient answer. I'm better. Olivia nodded. Waiting. Still figuring things out. Another nod. No interruption. No pressure. Just patience. The longer they dated, the more Ben appreciated that quality. Olivia challenged him when necessary. But she never rushed him. The distinction mattered. Emily's trying, he said. That's good. Yeah. He smiled slightly. I think everyone's trying. That sounds exhausting. It kind of is. Olivia laughed. Then her expression softened. I'm glad. Ben looked at her. Yeah. Yeah. She tucked one leg beneath herself. Nobody gets a perfect family. Definitely not. But trying is something. The simplicity of the statement struck him. Because she was right. No magical solution existed. No ending where old wounds disappeared forever. Just people trying. Trying counted. For a while neither spoke. The apartment felt comfortable. Quiet. Peaceful. Ben found himself studying her. The way she always seemed fully present during conversations. The way her eyes brightened before a joke. The way she somehow balanced confidence and kindness without sacrificing either. He loved that about her. The realization arrived so naturally that it took several seconds to process. Ben blinked. Then sat up slightly. Olivia noticed immediately. That's a concerning face. What face? The realization face. I have a realization face? Everybody does. She set down her mug. What happened? Ben laughed softly. Mostly because there wasn't any elegant way to say it. No dramatic speech. No rehearsed declaration. Just truth. The same way everything important between them had started. You know what's funny? Doubtful. I spent months convinced you were impossible. Olivia looked delighted. Accurate. I thought arguing with you was exhausting. It is. And somehow that turned into being my favorite part of the week. For once, Olivia didn't have a quick response. The teasing vanished. Something warmer replaced it. Ben continued before he could overthink himself. I love you. Silence. Not an uncomfortable silence. Not a surprised one. Just a still moment. Like the world pausing briefly. Then Olivia smiled. A slow, beautiful smile. Good. Ben blinked. Good. Good. She laughed. I've been waiting forever. Forever. At least 2 weeks. That's not forever. It felt like forever. Ben shook his head. Somehow even this conversation had become mildly ridiculous, which was probably fitting. Olivia leaned forward. I love you too. The words settled over him gently, without fanfare, without uncertainty, simply true. For a man who had spent most of his life avoiding unnecessary drama, the moment felt surprisingly uncomplicated. Just two people choosing each other. Honestly, completely, the way the best decisions usually happened. And for the first time in months, Ben felt something he hadn't experienced in a while. Not relief, not responsibility, not patience, hope. The future remained unclear. Family relationships still needed work. Old wounds still needed time. Nothing was magically fixed. But for once, Ben wasn't carrying everything alone. And that made all the difference. Chapter 8. A better story. Spring arrived slowly. Ben was grateful for that. After the previous year, he appreciated anything that took its time. The trees turned green again. The weather warmed. Days grew longer. And life settled into something that felt surprisingly balanced. Not perfect. Ben had long since stopped expecting perfection. Just better. Better turned out to be more than enough. On Monday mornings, he went to work. His team handled their responsibilities without drama. People did their jobs. Then they went home and lived their lives, exactly as it should be. In the evenings, he spent time with Olivia. Sometimes dinner, sometimes walks, sometimes entire conversations dedicated to topics no reasonable person should care about. Last Tuesday's debate had concerned whether pancakes counted as dessert under specific circumstances. Neither had won, mostly because they were still arguing about it. Life was good, which felt strange to admit. Not because he didn't deserve happiness, because happiness rarely announced itself. It showed up quietly. Then one day, you noticed it had been there all along. The biggest difference involved his family. Not because everything had been fixed, because nobody was pretending anymore. Emily and their father had been speaking regularly for several months. Not constantly, not dramatically, just consistently. Sometimes they met for coffee, sometimes lunch, sometimes a phone call. A relationship rebuilding itself one conversation at a time. It wasn't always comfortable. Ben knew that. Emily occasionally called him afterward, usually to vent, sometimes to laugh, often both. I swear he's impossible. Ben balanced his phone between shoulder and ear while making dinner. Runs in the family. I walked right into that. You really did. Emily sighed, then laughed. He brought pictures. Pictures. Old family photos. Ben smiled. That sounded like their father. There were some good ones. There were also embarrassing ones. Also sounds like Dad. He had one of you wearing a pirate costume. Ben immediately stopped chopping vegetables. Destroy it. Absolutely not. Emily. I'm making copies. Ben groaned. The laughter that followed felt easy, natural, the way it had when they were kids. The realization wasn't lost on him. For a long time, he'd worried that once relationships cracked, they never fully recovered. Now he wasn't so sure. Some things couldn't be restored exactly as they had been. That didn't mean they couldn't become something good again. One Saturday afternoon, Ben found himself standing beside Olivia at a farmer's market. She was examining jars of homemade jam. With alarming seriousness. You've been looking at those for 10 minutes. This is research. It absolutely is not. It might be. For what article? Olivia paused. Desert tourism. Ben stared. Desert tourism isn't real. Everything is real if somebody writes about it. That explains far too much about the internet. A vendor laughed. Olivia accepted a sample spoon, then offered one to Ben. He tasted it. Okay. What? That's actually good. Her expression became triumphant. I knew it. You didn't know anything. I knew enough. He shook his head. Being wrong around Olivia was dangerous. She treated small victories like championship trophies. They continued through the market, talking, laughing, occasionally arguing. The familiar rhythm never felt repetitive. Not because they always agreed, because disagreement wasn't a threat. It never had been. One of the things Ben loved most about her was that neither of them needed to win. The conversation itself was usually the point. A few weeks later, Rick announced a large outdoor gathering. Apparently everyone they knew was invited. Ben suspected the guest list had been assembled using little more than optimism and available parking. Still, it sounded enjoyable. By late afternoon, the property was crowded. Children ran across open fields. Music played through outdoor speakers. People carried plates overloaded with food. Ben stood near one of the picnic tables talking with friends when Olivia appeared beside him. You've been hiding. I've been talking. Same thing. Before he could respond, Rick approached, looking far too cheerful. That was never good. Benjamin. Ben sighed. Whenever you use my full name, I become suspicious. You wound me. I recover quickly. Rick pointed toward Olivia. You know, I was right. Oh no. I was. You were unbearable. But correct. Olivia immediately joined the attack. That doesn't make it better. It makes it significantly better. No, Ben said. It just makes you more annoying. Rick looked delighted. The response only encouraged him. As expected, a small crowd gathered around the conversation. Everyone suddenly felt qualified to contribute opinions. Mostly opinions Ben hadn't requested. We all knew first, Tyler announced. No, you didn't. We absolutely did. You thought we were dating before we were dating. Exactly. That's not evidence. Tyler pointed proudly. It sounds like evidence. The group laughed. Beside him, Olivia was trying, and failing, not to laugh as well. Traitor. Eventually Rick wandered away in search of new opportunities to create chaos. Peace returned. For approximately 30 seconds. Then Olivia nudged Ben's arm. What? You know what's funny? Doubtful. She pointed across the yard. Ben followed her gaze. His father stood near one of the outdoor tables. Emily stood beside him. They were talking. Just talking. Nothing dramatic. No emotional speeches. No dramatic reconciliation. Simply existing in the same space. Comfortably. Easily. Like people learning one another again. Ben felt something loosen in his chest. A final knot he hadn't realized was still there. Yeah, he said quietly. That's pretty nice. Olivia glanced at him. The soft expression in her eyes told him she'd noticed exactly what he was looking at, and exactly what it meant. Neither said anything more. Neither needed to. As evening settled over the gathering, the crowd gradually thinned. People headed home. Children fell asleep in lawn chairs. The sky turned orange, then purple. Ben and Olivia eventually wandered away from the noise. The edge of the property offered a quiet path overlooking a small pond. For several minutes, they walked together in comfortable silence. The air felt cool, peaceful, the kind of evening people remembered later. Ben shoved his hands into his pockets. You know, he said, dangerous start. Probably. Olivia smiled. Continue. He watched the water for a moment, thinking. A year ago, he would have hated this entire situation. The family complications, the conversations, the emotional mess, every difficult moment, every uncomfortable truth, every disruption to the peaceful life he'd carefully built. Yet without any of it, none of this would exist. Not Emily rebuilding a relationship with their father. Not the honesty that had finally emerged. And definitely not Olivia. I've been thinking. There it is. What? The face. The realization face? The very one. Ben laughed, then shook his head. It's weird. What is? If Emily hadn't come over that day, Olivia immediately understood. The long weekend. The conversation. The moment everything changed. Then what? Ben smiled. I probably would have spent the weekend camping. True. And argued with some annoying woman about marshmallows. Olivia looked offended. Caramelized charcoal. That's not a real term. It should be. They both laughed. Then Olivia slipped her hand into his. The gesture felt natural. Comfortable. Like something that belonged there. Ben squeezed gently. For years he'd believed avoiding drama was the secret to a good life. Now he understood something different. The goal wasn't avoiding every difficult thing. The goal was choosing which things mattered enough to face. Family mattered. Love mattered. Truth mattered. Those things were worth the trouble. As they continued walking beneath the fading light, Ben realized something else. The story he'd inherited as a child had never been complete. The story he'd carried as an adult hadn't been complete either. Maybe nobody ever got the full story. Maybe all anyone could do was keep listening, keep learning, keep choosing the people who mattered. Beside him, Olivia squeezed his hand again. You're thinking too much. Probably. What about? Ben looked at her, then smiled. The future. For once, the uncertainty didn't bother him. For once, it actually sounded pretty good. Epilogue. Around the campfire. 1 year later, Ben stood beside a campfire holding a paper plate and wondering, not for the first time, how his life had become so crowded. Not physically crowded. The campsite itself had plenty of space. Emotionally crowded. In a good way. A year earlier, he would have described his life as peaceful. Now he would have described it as full. The distinction mattered. A burst of laughter erupted from the other side of the fire. Ben glanced up. His father and Emily were arguing about fishing. Not seriously. Nobody sounded angry. The disagreement revolved around whether a fish caught 10 years ago had actually been as large as advertised. According to his father, the fish had been impressive. According to Emily, it had apparently been the size of a small whale by this point. You exaggerate every year, she said. I do not. You absolutely do. It was a large fish. It was 6 inches. 12. 6. 12. 6. Ben smiled into his drink. Some wounds healed quietly. Not by disappearing. By being replaced with new memories. Watching Emily roll her eyes at their father felt strangely significant. A year ago, neither would have been sitting at the same campfire. Now they were debating fish sizes. Life was weird. Sometimes weird was wonderful. A familiar elbow nudged his side. What are you smiling about? Ben looked down. Olivia stood beside him carrying 2 mugs. One promptly appeared in his hand. Thanks. You're avoiding the question. I was thinking. That explains the expression. You still claim I have a thinking face. You absolutely do. Olivia took a sip from her mug. It usually means one of 2 things. Oh, either you're having an existential crisis. Helpful. Or you're trying to optimize something unnecessarily. Also helpful. She grinned. Ben shook his head. Some things hadn't changed. Fortunately. Over the previous year, they'd moved in together. The decision hadn't involved dramatic declarations or elaborate planning. Like most major developments in their relationship, it had happened through a series of practical conversations. Their friends had expected a complicated process. Instead, it went something like this. Olivia, you spend most nights at my apartment. Ben, true. Olivia, you keep leaving sweaters there. Ben, also true. Olivia, this seems inefficient. Ben, agreed. 3 months later, they'd signed a lease. Tyler still complained that the story lacked romance. Ben considered that Tyler's problem. The relationship itself remained exactly what he'd hoped for. They still argued. Frequently. Yesterday's debate concerned whether soup qualified as a beverage under highly specific circumstances. Neither had persuaded the other. Both seemed determined to continue trying for the remainder of their lives. Ben found that deeply comforting. Across the campsite, Rick was telling a story. Naturally, he was the loudest person present. Some things were eternal. At one point, he pointed dramatically toward Ben and Olivia. They never believed me. Immediately, everyone groaned. Not this again. Rick ignored them. I recognized destiny. You recognized 2 people arguing, Olivia called. Same thing. It absolutely wasn't. I stand by my prediction. You bring it up every month, Ben said. Because I was right every month. The crowd laughed. Rick looked unbearably pleased with himself. His wife looked exhausted by him. Clearly a familiar situation. The fire crackled. The evening grew darker. Stars appeared overhead. One by one, conversations split into smaller groups. The comfortable kind of silence eventually settled over the campsite. Not emptiness. Contentment. Ben leaned back in his chair. For a while, he simply watched. His father talking with friends. Emily laughing. Olivia arguing with someone about travel recommendations. The people who mattered. The people who chose to remain. The people who made life complicated and worthwhile. A year ago, he would never have predicted any of this. The family conversations, the reconciliations, the unexpected relationship, the future taking shape around him. None of it had been part of a plan. He wasn't sure that bothered him anymore. Olivia rested her head briefly against his shoulder. What are you thinking now? Ben looked at the fire, then at the people gathered around it. Finally, he smiled. Just appreciating things. She pulled back slightly. Wow. What? That was suspiciously sentimental. I can be sentimental. No. Yes. No. Ben laughed. Some arguments were simply traditions. He slipped an arm around her shoulders. Olivia settled comfortably against him. Neither felt any need to fill the silence after that. The fire continued burning. The conversations continued drifting through the night. And for perhaps the first time in his life, Ben understood something important. A good life wasn't one without complications. It was one filled with people worth navigating them for. Around the campfire, surrounded by family, friends, and the woman he loved, that seemed like a pretty good ending. Or perhaps, Ben thought as Olivia squeezed his hand, a pretty good beginning.